The smell of salt lingered in the air, mixing with the faint metallic tang of rust. The dim, artificial lighting in the players' dormitory flickered occasionally, casting an eerie shadow across the bunk beds. The games had started days ago, but the sleep had become a luxury. Paranoia ran high, and trust was a fragile thing, as the glass bridge they had all seen in previous rounds. Yet, in this brutal, calculated nightmare, we had found something unexpected. Thanos, or maybe he found you. At first, you weren't sure really what to do with him. He was reckless, sharp-tongued, and always hovering between charm and chaos. He had this way of making his presence known, whether by provoking someone just to see the reaction or sitting silently watching the room with an expression you couldn't exactly decipher. But somehow, amidst the blood-stained games, the whispered betrayals, the two of you had become something of friends, a cautious alliance at first. But then maybe something more. You weren't sure exactly how it happened. Maybe it was how he had pulled you out of the harm's way during the Dalgona game, his grip on your wrist in a firm, grounding way. Or maybe it was the late-night conversation whispered in the dim light when everybody else had fallen asleep. The weight of the world had felt a little lighter in his presence. Now, you lay on the cold, hard mattress at the floor, staring at your shared bunk. The warmth of Thanos' body beside you was the only source of comfort in this hellish place. He had an arm wrapped protectively around your waist, his fingers twitching in his sleep. For a moment you allowed yourself to forget where you were. But peace never lasted too long here. When the morning alarm blared, signaling another day in the games, Thanos was already up. He sat on the edge of the bed, rolling his shoulders, his purple hair disheveled from sleep, his usual cocky smirk absent, replaced by something more guarded. "Didn't sleep last night?" you asked, sitting up. Thanos let out a short chuckle. "Sleep's for those who don't have to worry about getting a knife in their ribs." You frowned. "You trust me, right?" His gaze met yours, and for a second, something flickered in his eyes, something you couldn't quite place. But just as quickly, it was gone. He masked by his usual bravo. "You're probably the only person here I do trust," he admitted, standing up and stretching. Not that that means much. It was rare, a rare moment of vulnerability from him, and you held on to it like a lifeline, treasuring it in these desperate times. The next game was brutal. The rules had been simple. Find a partner, work together, survive, but simple, but never easy. It was never meant to be easy here. You ended up paired with a newcomer, someone who had only recently joined your group. Thanos had been assigned to a different team, forcing you apart. You had seen the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands twitched as if itching to pull you back to him. But rules were rules. The game itself had been a test of endurance and quick thinking. You and your partner had barely scraped through, emerging on the other side, breathless and shaken. When you returned to the dormitory, exhausted but alive, Thanos was waiting. His usual smirk was nowhere to be found. "You're late," he muttered. His voice was low and unreadable. You sighed, rubbing your temples. "It wasn't exactly a walk in the park, Thanos." He didn't respond immediately. His gaze flickered to your partner, who was speaking with another group across the room. Something in his expression darkened. "You two looked close out there," he said finally. You frowned. We were working together, so I guess." Then let out a short, humorous laugh. "Yeah, sure," he said, running a hand through his purple hair. There was something off about him tonight, something simmering beneath the surface. You reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "What's wrong?" For a moment he hesitated, but then he just pulled away. "Nothing," he spat. A lie. But now wasn't the time to push. He watched as he turned away, his shoulders tense, and the distance between you two felt wider than ever. And for the first time since these hellish games began, a pit of unease seemed to settle in the pit of your stomach. The air in the dormitory was heavy, with exhaustion and fear and something else, something unspoken. The fluorescent lights cast everything in an unforgiving glow, making the bruises and the cuts on everyone's face look sharper, more painful. You sat on the edge of your bunk, absently tracing the patterns on your palm. As you replayed the events of the games in your mind, it had been brutal, but you survived. That should have been enough. But Thanos hadn't spoken to you since your return. You weren't sure when it had started, but the shift was undeniable. The warmth he usually showed you, his teasing remarks, it was kind of replaced by something cold and distant. You had thought maybe he was just stressed, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe the anxiety of the games were finally getting to him, but when you turned to look at him sitting on the opposite side of the room, jaw clenched and eyes fixated on the floor, you knew there was something else wrong. Something was definitely wrong. You stood, crossing the room, ignoring the way some of the other players watched you. Allies were always shifting in places. Everyone knew that the two of you were close. If cracks were beginning to form, people would notice and they would use it against you. Thanos tensed when you sat next to him, but he didn't move away. That was something at least. Are you gonna tell me what's wrong, or am I gonna have to guess? You asked, keeping your voice low. He scoffed. Guessing wouldn't be hard. You frowned. Thanos, talk to me. For a moment he didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at the wall like it had personally offended him. Then with a sigh, he spoke. You were with them all day, he muttered. What? You blinked. The new guy. Your partner. His voice was sharp. There was something beneath it. Something raw. You two looked pretty comfortable together. Realization hit you like a slap. Thanos. You exhaled, rubbing your temple. It was a game. We had to work together. Yeah? He asked. His laugh was bitter, hollow. But you didn't have to laugh at their jokes or lean in close or look at them like... He cut himself off, shaking his head. You stared at him, stunned. What? You think I'm interested in them? He didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than any words ever could. Frustration bubbled in your chest. You'd been through hell and gotten back together. Risked your lives for each other, and now he was doubting you? Thanos, do you even hear yourself? You snapped. We're in a life and death game, and you're worried about what? That I might like someone else? His jaw clenched. I've seen it happen before. Your heart twisted at the way he said it, like he was convincing himself it was already true. This isn't before, you said firmly. This is us, and I care about you, and I can't spend every second proving that to you. His fingers curled into a fist. Then don't. The words felt like a slap to the face. For a moment, neither you spoke. The tension between you was suffocating, pressing down like a weight on your chest. Finally, you stood. I don't know what's going on in your head, but I'm not playing this game with you. Not now, not ever. And not with you. And with that, you walked away, leaving him sitting there, his expression unreadable. The next day, nothing got better. He barely spoke to you. He kept his distance, lingering on the edge of conversation, watching but never joining. When you tried to approach him, he would find an excuse to leave. It hurt more than you wanted to admit. You had thought you understood. You thought you understood him. Underneath all the bravado and the recklessness, he was someone who cared deeply and fiercely in a way that most people didn't. But now that part of him felt locked away, guarded behind something you couldn't exactly reach. And the worst part was you were too exhausted to keep trying. You had spent too long relying on each other, holding whatever fragile hope you could find in this nightmare of a game. But if he was going to push you away, there was only so much you could do. So you stopped trying. You stopped looking for him across the room. You stopped waiting for him to sit next to you at night. You stopped hoping things would go back to the way they were. And maybe deep down he noticed, because for the first time since these games started, you felt like you were truly alone. So now, you had to make a choice. What would you do?